Judge Andrew Napolitano is joining us with this senior judicial analyst. Again, the White House is very clear that they were acting within the scope of the law. The orders were given to take out these boats, and this continues on to their effort to stop drug trafficking here in the States. It does get a little murky of what happened in terms of the orders, who carried what, who said what. Talk to us about that.
Well, I wish the White House would reveal to us the laws on which the president is relying. He says he has an opinion from the Justice Department, but neither the Justice Department nor the White House will offer it for public scrutiny. And it gives me no pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war.
This is absolutely explosive, you guys. We've got a nuclear bomb going off inside the MAGA movement right now that's going to tear Trump's coalition apart. Former Fox News judge Andrew Napolitano just went on Newsmax and dropped the most devastating bombshell against Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He's demanding criminal prosecution for war crimes. War crimes, people. We're talking about a sitting cabinet member being called out by one of the most respected conservative legal minds in America. Can you believe this? Napolitano didn't mince words on Newsmax. He said Hegseth should be prosecuted for a war crime, and that everyone from the secretary to the admiral to the trigger pullers should face charges. This isn't some liberal Democrat making wild accusations. This is a guy who spent years defending conservative positions on Fox News, and now he's calling for Trump's own defense secretary to be thrown in prison. The MAGA civil war is officially here, and it's getting ugly fast. Here's what's got everyone losing their minds. The Washington Post reported that Hegseth ordered kill everybody after an initial strike on a Venezuelan boat left survivors clinging to debris in the water. We're talking about a double-tap strike where they hit the boat once, and then when people were trying to survive in the water, Hegseth allegedly ordered them to finish the job. That's not combat. That's execution of helpless survivors. And according to international law, that's a textbook war crime. The video footage is apparently so disturbing that even Republicans are demanding answers. Senator Mark Kelly is calling for congressional hearings. Representative Jim Himes called the video footage disturbing and said it raises serious questions about Hegseth's fitness for office. When you've got bipartisan outrage over something this serious, you know it's not going away anytime soon. This isn't partisan politics. This is about basic human decency and following the laws of war that America has championed for decades. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Hegseth first denied that he gave the order, and then the White House said he did give the order, and then the White House said it was in self-defense. Self-defense. You got 2 people in the ocean clinging to a burning boat to stay alive, and they're going to be killed for self-defense? That doesn't make any sense.
For the viewers that may not know about that part, I have it for them. This is the White House press secretary talking about this being conducted in self-defense. Watch.
The strike conducted on September 2nd was conducted in self-defense to protect Americans in vital United States interests. The strike was conducted in international waters and in accordance with the law of armed conflict.
Well, the law of armed conflict says survivors have to be rescued. They can't be killed. That's very clear. It's in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and it's in federal law. So we'll see where this goes. I think that both houses of Congress are going to investigate it.
She goes on to say this. I just wanted to read this quote. The president has made it quite clear that if narco-terrorists are again trafficking illegal drugs towards the United States, he, meaning the president, has the authority to kill them. That is what this administration is doing, end quote. Killing 11 in that moment. So you're saying that's not a good defense. This is a war crime. That from you.
Correct. Correct. Even Congress.
They're heavy words.
Very heavy words, which is what.
But here's where it gets really wild. Hegseth is defending himself by claiming it was the fog of war and that everything was lawful under international law. Yeah, right, the fog of war doesn't cover executing survivors who are floating helplessly in the ocean. There's no military doctrine anywhere that says it's okay to kill people who are no longer a threat. This isn't some split-second decision in the heat of battle. This was a deliberate order to murder people who were already defeated and defenseless. And Trump? He's backing Hegseth to the hilt. The president is standing by his defense secretary even as conservative legal experts are calling him a war criminal. That tells you everything you need to know about Trump's priorities. He'd rather protect his political appointee than uphold the rule of law or maintain America's moral standing in the world. Come on, this is exactly the kind of authoritarian behavior that Democrats have been warning about for years. The timing of this controversy couldn't be worse for Trump either. He's already dealing with massive backlash over his Venezuela narco strikes and asylum bans affecting 19 different nations. His foreign policy is getting more aggressive by the day, and now his own defense secretary is facing war crimes allegations. The optics here are absolutely devastating for an administration that's trying to project strength and competence on the world stage. But what's really fascinating is how this is splitting the conservative movement right down the middle. You've got guys like Napolitano, who spent years as a Fox News legal analyst, breaking ranks and demanding accountability. Meanwhile, you've got Trump loyalists circling the wagons and claiming this is all fake news or deep state propaganda. The MAGA movement is literally eating itself alive over whether war crimes are acceptable if they're committed by Trump's people. This connects to all the other controversies swirling around Hegseth right now. The Signalgate leaks showing potentially classified communications. Republican Senator Rand Paul calling Hegseth incompetent and unfit for office. Multiple congressional investigations into his conduct. The guy is basically a walking scandal machine, and now he's got war crimes allegations on top of everything else. How is this the person Trump chose to run the Pentagon? The political implications here are massive. Democrats are going to use this to hammer Trump on his cabinet picks and his foreign policy decisions. They're going to argue that this is what happens when you put unqualified political loyalists in charge of life and death military decisions. Meanwhile, Republicans are going to be forced to choose between defending potential war crimes or breaking with Trump and his defense secretary. That's not a position any politician wants to be in, especially with the 2026 midterms coming up. And let's talk about what this does to America's standing in the world. We're supposed to be the country that upholds international law and holds other nations accountable for war crimes. How can we maintain any moral authority when our own defense secretary is accused of ordering the execution of helpless survivors? This is the kind of stuff that destroys alliances, undermines our credibility, and gives our enemies propaganda victories for decades. Napolitano's call for prosecution isn't just legal commentary. It's a declaration that the rule of law matters more than political loyalty. But in Trump's world, where personal loyalty is the only thing that counts, that kind of principled stand makes you a traitor to the cause. The battle lines are drawn, and this is going to get a lot messier before it's over. Alright, so let's dig into what's really happening here, because this Hegseth war crime story is about way more than just one controversial defense secretary. This is about the complete breakdown of conservative unity and the beginning of a MAGA civil war that could reshape American politics for years to come. Here's the backstory that most people are missing. Pete Hegseth wasn't exactly Trump's first choice for defense secretary. The guy was basically a Fox News host who talked tough on TV but had limited actual military leadership experience. Trump picked him because he was loyal and because he looked good on television. But running the Pentagon isn't a TV show, and now we're seeing what happens when you put unqualified people in charge of life and death decisions. The Venezuelan boat strike that's causing all this controversy happened during one of Trump's aggressive anti-narcotics operations in South American waters. These strikes were supposed to be precision operations targeting drug traffickers, but according to the Washington Post reporting, they turned into something much darker and more disturbing. The details of what allegedly happened are absolutely horrifying. A Venezuelan boat was hit by U.S. forces during an anti-drug operation. The initial strike left survivors floating in the water, clinging to debris, clearly no longer a military threat. That's when Hegseth allegedly gave the order to kill everybody who was left alive. We're not talking about active combatants here. We're talking about people who were helpless in the water, possibly wounded, definitely defenseless. Under every interpretation of international humanitarian law, attacking those survivors would constitute a war crime. It's the kind of thing we prosecuted Nazi officers for after World War II. But here's where it gets really wild. The video footage of this incident apparently exists and has been seen by congressional investigators. Multiple sources describe it as disturbing and potentially incriminating. The fact that we have actual video evidence of what happened makes this story impossible to just dismiss as fake news or enemy propaganda. There's visual proof of whatever Hegseth ordered, and from the reactions of people who've seen it, it's pretty damning evidence of serious misconduct. Andrew Napolitano's decision to go public with his call for prosecution is absolutely unprecedented in conservative media circles. This guy spent years as a Fox News legal analyst defending conservative positions and Trump administration policies. For him to break ranks this dramatically and call for criminal charges against a sitting defense secretary shows just how serious these allegations really are. Napolitano isn't some liberal activist. He's a respected conservative legal scholar who understands both military law and constitutional principles. When he says Hegseth should be prosecuted, that carries real weight in conservative legal circles. The bipartisan nature of the congressional backlash is also telling. Senator Mark Kelly, who's a former Navy pilot and astronaut, isn't someone who throws around war crimes allegations lightly. When he demands hearings and accountability, it's because he understands military culture and knows what crosses the line. Representative Jim Himes, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, has access to classified information about these operations. His description of the video as disturbing suggests the evidence is pretty compelling. What's really fracturing the conservative movement is the different responses to these allegations. Traditional conservatives who believe in the rule of law and American moral leadership are horrified by what allegedly happened. They understand that war crimes prosecutions aren't about politics. They're about maintaining the principles that separate us from our enemies. But Trump loyalists are treating this as just another partisan attack that needs to be defended against, regardless of the facts. That fundamental disagreement about whether principles matter more than political loyalty is tearing MAGA apart from the inside. Hegseth's defense strategy is also pretty telling. Instead of denying the allegations outright, he's claiming that everything was lawful under international law and blaming the fog of war. That kind of legalistic parsing suggests the basic facts aren't really in dispute. He's not saying he didn't give those orders, he's saying those orders were somehow justified. But international humanitarian law is pretty clear about the protection of civilians and the treatment of people who are no longer participating in hostilities. There's no fog of war exception for executing helpless survivors. The timing of this controversy is particularly devastating for Trump's foreign policy agenda. He's been trying to project strength and decisive leadership in his second term, but now his defense secretary is facing war crimes allegations that make America look like a rogue nation that doesn't follow its own rules. The Venezuela operations were supposed to demonstrate Trump's tough approach to drug trafficking and regional security threats. Instead, they've become a symbol of American war crimes and moral bankruptcy. The Signalgate connection is also worth understanding because it shows a pattern of questionable decision-making and potential security violations. Hegseth's use of encrypted messaging apps to communicate with foreign officials and military contractors raises serious questions about transparency and accountability in military operations. When you combine that with war crimes allegations, it paints a picture of a defense secretary who operates outside normal legal and ethical constraints. Republican Senator Rand Paul's criticism of Hegseth as incompetent adds another layer to this story. Paul has been one of the few Republicans willing to question Trump's cabinet picks on competency grounds rather than just political loyalty. His assessment that Hegseth is unfit for office carries weight because Paul has consistently opposed endless wars and military adventurism, regardless of which party is in power. The international implications of this controversy are massive and long-lasting. America's allies are already questioning our commitment to international law under Trump's aggressive foreign policy. War crimes allegations against our defense secretary will give our enemies propaganda victories for years and make it much harder to hold other countries accountable for their violations of humanitarian law. How can we criticize Russia for targeting civilians in Ukraine when our own defense secretary allegedly ordered the execution of helpless survivors? Democrats are obviously going to use this controversy to maximum political advantage in the 2026 midterms. They'll argue that this is what happens when you elect authoritarian leaders who don't respect the rule of law. They'll tie Hegseth's alleged war crimes to Trump's broader pattern of authoritarian behavior and contempt for democratic norms. For voters who are already concerned about Trump's authoritarian tendencies, war crimes allegations against his defense secretary will confirm their worst fears about where the country is heading. But the real damage might be within the conservative movement itself. When respected conservative legal scholars like Napolitano break ranks and demand accountability, it creates permission for other conservatives to question their loyalty to Trump and his administration. The MAGA movement has always been held together by shared grievances and personal loyalty to Trump rather than consistent principles. War crimes allegations force conservatives to choose between those loyalties and their fundamental beliefs about American values and the rule of law. The next few weeks are going to be crucial for determining whether this controversy destroys Hegseth's career or just becomes another partisan battle that gets forgotten in the news cycle. Congressional hearings, potential criminal investigations, and continued media coverage will keep this story alive. But the real question is whether enough conservatives will decide that defending alleged war crimes crosses a line they're not willing to cross. The MAGA civil war is just getting started. So let's break this down into what actually matters, because this Hegseth war crimes controversy is about to completely reshape the political landscape in ways that nobody's fully prepared for yet. First point, this is the biggest fracture in the conservative movement since Trump entered politics, and it's only going to get worse from here. Think about what's happening. Andrew Napolitano, a guy who spent years as Fox News' go-to legal analyst defending conservative positions, is now calling for the criminal prosecution of Trump's defense secretary. This isn't some minor policy disagreement or tactical dispute. This is a fundamental break over whether war crimes are acceptable if they're committed by people on your political team. Napolitano is basically saying that principles matter more than political loyalty, and that's heresy in Trump's MAGA movement. You've got traditional conservatives who believe in the rule of law and American moral leadership on one side. They're horrified by allegations that a U.S. defense secretary ordered the execution of helpless survivors floating in the ocean. On the other side, you've got Trump loyalists who are treating this as just another partisan attack that needs to be defended regardless of the facts. That fundamental disagreement about whether principles matter more than political loyalty is tearing the conservative coalition apart from the inside. When respected conservatives like Napolitano and Rand Paul are breaking ranks, it gives permission for other conservatives to question their blind loyalty to Trump and his administration. Are you kidding me? The movement that used to champion law and order is now defending potential war crimes just because the guy accused happens to work for Trump. Second point, the evidence in this case appears to be absolutely devastating and impossible to dismiss as fake news or partisan propaganda. We're not talking about anonymous sources or secondhand accounts here. There's apparently video footage of the Venezuelan boat strike that congressional investigators have reviewed. Multiple sources describe this footage as disturbing and potentially incriminating. The Washington Post reported that Hegseth ordered kill everybody after survivors were left floating helplessly in the water. Senator Mark Kelly, who's a former Navy pilot, is demanding congressional hearings. Representative Jim Himes, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, called the video footage disturbing. These aren't people who throw around war crimes allegations lightly or for political gain. They're serious lawmakers who understand military culture and international law. The fact that even Republicans are demanding accountability shows how bad this evidence probably is. Hegseth's defense strategy is also telling. Instead of denying the allegations outright, he's claiming everything was lawful under international law and blaming the fog of war. That kind of legalistic parsing suggests the basic facts aren't really in dispute. He's not saying he didn't give those orders. He's arguing that those orders were somehow justified. But there's no fog of war exception for executing defenseless survivors. International humanitarian law is crystal clear about the protection of civilians and people who are no longer participating in hostilities. This isn't some gray area where reasonable people can disagree. This is textbook war crimes territory. Third point, this controversy destroys America's moral authority on the world stage and gives our enemies propaganda victories for decades to come. We're supposed to be the country that upholds international law and holds other nations accountable for war crimes. We prosecuted Nazi officers after World War II for exactly this kind of conduct. We've spent decades criticizing other countries for violating the Geneva Conventions and targeting civilians. But now our own defense secretary is accused of ordering the execution of helpless survivors, and the president is backing him to the hilt. How can we maintain any credibility when we criticize Russia for targeting civilians in Ukraine or China for human rights abuses? Our enemies are going to point to Hegseth's alleged war crimes every time we try to take the moral high ground on anything. This completely undermines our ability to lead international coalitions or hold other countries accountable for their violations of humanitarian law. Trump's aggressive foreign policy was supposed to project American strength and decisiveness. Instead, it's making us look like a rogue nation that doesn't follow its own rules. The Venezuela operations that led to these allegations were supposed to demonstrate tough leadership on drug trafficking and regional security. Instead, they've become a symbol of American war crimes and moral bankruptcy. This is exactly the kind of reputation damage that takes generations to repair, if it can be repaired at all. Fourth point, the political implications for the 2026 midterms are absolutely massive and probably fatal for Republican chances of maintaining control. Democrats are going to use this war crimes controversy to hammer every Republican candidate who doesn't explicitly condemn Hegseth and call for his resignation. They're going to argue that this is what happens when you elect authoritarian leaders who don't respect the rule of law or basic human decency. For suburban voters who are already uncomfortable with Trump's authoritarian tendencies, allegations that his defense secretary ordered war crimes will confirm their worst fears about where the country is heading. Independent voters who might have been willing to give Trump a chance in his second term are going to be horrified by the idea that we're now the kind of country that executes helpless survivors and then defends it as legitimate military action. The international embarrassment alone will be enough to turn many voters against Republican candidates. But the real damage might be within the Republican coalition itself. When respected conservatives like Napolitano are breaking ranks and demanding accountability, it creates permission structures for other Republicans to abandon Trump and his allies. The MAGA movement has always been held together by shared grievances and personal loyalty rather than consistent principles. War crimes allegations force conservatives to choose between those loyalties and their fundamental beliefs about American values, military honor, and the rule of law. The broader pattern here is what should really scare Republicans who care about winning elections. This isn't just about one controversial defense secretary, it's about a systematic breakdown in Trump's ability to maintain political unity within his own movement. You've got conservative legal scholars demanding prosecutions, Republican senators questioning competency, bipartisan congressional investigations, and international allies expressing concern about American war crimes. That's not sustainable political coalition building. That's a movement in complete meltdown over fundamental questions of principle versus loyalty. When your political movement gets to the point where you're defending alleged war crimes just to maintain party unity, you've lost the moral authority to govern. When respected conservatives start breaking ranks over questions of basic human decency, you've lost the intellectual credibility to lead a major political party. The next few weeks are going to determine whether this becomes a presidency-ending scandal or just another controversy that gets forgotten in the endless Trump news cycle. Congressional hearings will keep this story alive. Potential criminal investigations will add legal jeopardy to the political damage. International allies will continue expressing concern about American war crimes. But the real question is whether enough conservatives decide that defending alleged war crimes crosses a line they're not willing to cross. The MAGA civil war is officially here, and Hegseth's alleged war crimes just lit the fuse on a political bomb that could destroy Trump's coalition from the inside. Andrew Napolitano fired the first shot in this civil war by demanding criminal prosecution, but he won't be the last conservative to choose principles over political loyalty. The reckoning is finally here, and it's going to be brutal.